When I was 18 years old, I smoked cigarettes. I was a young punk living on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and one day I had to travel to Florida. On the way, we stopped at a gas station in Alabama. And imagine my surprise when I was told by the gas station attendant that I was too young to buy cigarettes. I had been old enough about 20 miles back, but in Alabama, I needed to be 19. Now, you shouldn't smoke, it's bad for you. But that's really more of the do as I say, not as I do kind of advice. Anyway, in that moment, all those years ago, I had a question pretty similar to the one submitted by Hope and Ethan to Ask Alabama. Why is the tobacco age limit 19 in Alabama? And Hope and Ethan, since you're asking me and not the lady at the Texaco, you'll get an answer that isn't, I don't know, that'll be $1.20 for the soda. So the tobacco age limit restrictions in Alabama are tied to the concept of being a minor. The age at which the government no longer considers you a minor is called the age of majority. But the age of majority isn't just about when you can buy tobacco. It's about when you can legally sign a contract, buy a car, sign a lease on an apartment, that kind of thing, and at a certain point in history when you were old enough to drink. Back in the 1960s, a lot of states tied the idea of age of majority to the age you're legally allowed to vote. At that time, the voting age was 21. But the Vietnam War changed that. During the war, a lot of young people started to ask, how is it that I'm old enough to get drafted into fighting a war, but I'm not old enough to vote on the people who send me to war? That question got asked enough times that eventually Congress passed a constitutional amendment that changed the legal voting age in America to 18. In 1971, the 26th Amendment was ratified faster than any other amendment in our country's history. But with that change, a lot of states started asking, well, if they're old enough to vote at 18, should we change the age they become adults to 18? Now, the federal government doesn't really have a stake in age of majority. It's up to each state to pick their own age. And around this time, a lot of states decided to make a change. Between 1970 and 1975, around 30 states, including Alabama, scaled back the age when people are considered to be adults. Now, this is going to get us to when the smoking age was set to 19 in Alabama, but keep in mind the people making the decision were really more focused on the fact that this changed the drinking age. Most of those 30 states changed the age of majority to 18. Alabama and a few other states thought that was a little too young for kids to be drinking, so they went with 19. And in its centuries-long effort to remain the least remarkable state, Delaware changed its age of majority from 21 all the way back to 20. Because changing nothing would have made a statement, but barely changing anything, now that's the Delaware way. Anyway, Alabama was at the very back end of this trend, being the last state to change the age of majority during this period. But the trend didn't stop because of anything Alabama did. It stopped because studies started coming out about the impact that all these states changing the drinking age was having on the roads. When all of a sudden 18, 19, and 20-year-old kids were given free rein to drink, they did what idiot kids do. They got hammered, they got behind the wheel, and they ended up getting into a lot of crashes. When people saw the number of DUIs among young people spike, they started to question whether they had made the right decision. By the 1980s, the federal government decided to step in. Now, the federal government couldn't force a state to change the drinking age. As I said earlier, that's really up to the individual states. But they could dangle funding over a state's head. The federal government passed a law that encouraged states to decouple the age of majority from the drinking age and return the drinking age nationwide to 21. If states refused, the federal government withheld federal transportation funds, basically saying, if you guys want to keep letting drunk kids on the roads, we ain't paying to fix them anymore. The states all eventually fell in line, and the drinking age was decoupled from the rest of the rights you got from reaching the age of majority in the mid-1980s. So your answer, Hope and Ethan, is at the time they picked the legal age you could buy tobacco, no one was really focused on tobacco. They were focused on alcohol. And by the time the two issues were treated separately, people were starting to become aware of the health dangers of tobacco, so there wasn't really any big push to help sell more cigarettes. Now, bills have been introduced as recently as just a few years ago to scale back the rest of the age of majority rights in Alabama to 18. But even those bills say they would keep the smoking age at 19. So it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. Anyway, thanks Hope and Ethan for encouraging me to answer a question I've had for a while, and forcing me to grapple with my many complicated feelings about Delaware. That place really is the lukewarm tap water of states. I'm Jonathan Sobolewski for Reckon. If you like these videos and like what we're doing on Reckon, you can help us out by following Reckon by AL.com on Facebook and Twitter. Also, we've got Instagram and podcasts, and newsletters, and Ask Alabama. If you've got a question for Ask Alabama, you can submit it to AL.com/ask. Thanks for watching.